Shtëpia është aty, ku zemra rreh, aty ku më presin sy të gëzuar me padurim, çdo herë që kthehem në vendin tim. Largimi është gjithmonë i vështirë, ndaj sigurohem të jem aty, në ditët më të rëndësishme për ta, me EasyPay dhe Ria Money Transfer. Unë dërgoj para, me tarifat më të lira, kudo në Shqipëri.
Daja, po ti s'do vish për diklinin time?
Nuk mund të vi dot sot, por të kam sjell një surprizë që do të pëlqej shumë.
Nuk ka gjë më të bukur, se sa të gëzosh njerëzit e tu më të dashur. EasyPay dhe Ria Money Transfer dërgojnë para aty ku vërtet ka rëndësi.
Mirëmbrëma të nderuar shikues të televizionit ALB UK dhe mirë se vini në emisionin UniversAL. Në emisionin e sonte do jemi të fokusuar tek pranimi i zotit Sali Berisha, kryetarit të Partisë Demokratike, që ka marrë një letër nga Home Secretary i Britanisë së Madhe, ku i komunikohet shpallja në GRATA edhe nga Britania e Madhe. Dhe për të biseduar mbi këtë kemi një ish gazetar të BBC-s në lidhje nëpërmes Skype, i cili është edhe Balkans Consultant Economist Intelligence Unit, pra është roli i Gabriel Partos ose Gabriel Partos në anglisht, të cilin tani më e kemi në një lidhje të drejtpërdrejtë të tash në Skype. Mr. Partos, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Faleminderit.
I am not sure if you can hear me. I have a difficulty hearing you in the studio at the moment.
I can hear you, and thank you for inviting me to give an interview.
Great, thank you. I can hear you loud and clear now. Mr. Partos, as you are aware, the former Albanian president, former prime minister and current leader of the Albanian Democratic Party, Sali Berisha, has made public a letter received from the Home Secretary where he is informed with the decision taken to declare him as a person non grata in the United Kingdom. Now, we all are aware about the travel bans imposed in Russian politicians given the invasion of Ukraine, but we are not so used to know about other politicians around the world who have this status from the United Kingdom. At least those ones that in appearance do not seem to be a direct threat to the United Kingdom or UK interests. How known is this practice according to you in the United Kingdom?
You're absolutely right. This is not the same system that's been applied to Russian oligarchs, billionaires who are believed to be supporting President Putin and his policy of aggression in Ukraine, nor is it the traditional form of diplomatic expulsion of persona non grata of diplomats or other nationals who are expelled from a country, persona non grata in the traditional sense for espionage activities. This is a relatively new practice that has emerged in recent years, and I believe the number of foreign politicians who are being involved in this for reasons of alleged involvement in corrupt activities or links to organized crime is around 20 or maybe 27 is the exact number. It's a relatively new practice, in other words, and similar to the American State Department system of designating individuals as being undesirable to enter the country.
Well, this decision comes just over a year from when United States Secretary Antony Blinken took the exact same decision for Sali Berisha. Do you think there is a joint operation, if you like, between the United States and United Kingdom in tackling the corruption and organized crime in Albania and Western Balkans in general? Or is it a spontaneous decision taken by the United Kingdom?
No, I'm absolutely certain that this is part of a joint policy and enterprise in that sense. And this is showing British support for the American practice of keeping out of the country, but more importantly, in a sense, signaling also to the population of the country where these politicians are based, where they live, that these individuals are considered to be undesirable. So it is part of, in other words, of a comprehensive joint policy, and there has always been very close cooperation on such issues between the United States and the United Kingdom, not least because clearly the information that these decisions are based on would have been supplied by intelligence operations. And as I was saying, the two countries have extremely close links on these matters as part of the special relationship that has really existed between the United Kingdom and the United States since the end of the Second World War.
Right. In the letter reviewed by Salih Berisha yesterday, it outlines the grounds of this decision, and according to Berisha, two are the reasons. One, for having a clear connection with the organized crime and criminal groups who pose a risk to public in both Albania and United Kingdom, and secondly, the corruption and the enrichment of himself and those around him, and for protecting individuals involved in organized crime. We have heard such accusations directed to politicians of both spectrums over the year or during the years of during the Albanian transition years. But do you think these accusations are now proven for Salih Berisha? And if so, why are they not made public?
Well, I think there are two points I would like to make. First of all is that from what I've read in the statement issued by the UK government through Sir Stuart Peach, it's who is the Western Balkans ambassador, special representative, the claims about involvement in corruption on the one hand and links to organized crime apply to several individuals. They're not specific to Mr. Berisha. And I suspect that in his case, the issue is more to do, as in the case of the American designation that was, as you mentioned, announced just over a year ago. It's more to do with what would be alleged to have been significant corruption, particularly during the time when Mr. Berisha was in office as Prime Minister, 2005 to 2013. So what I'm suggesting is that the broad reason for excluding some people from entering the United Kingdom or possibly freezing their assets applies to a number of individuals, and it is not necessarily the case that both these arguments would apply to Mr. Berisha. As I was saying, it's more likely in his case is to do with the his past service in office as Prime Minister, and it's more to do with allegations of corruption than necessarily involvement in organized crime.
But they remain allegations at such point, I mean, for the time being, is that right? So he's innocent until proven guilty?
Of course, only a court of law can rule on that, but the very fact that the British government has decided to take steps on the basis of such allegations indicates that as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, these allegations are so well founded that they do not need to be tested in court, number one. Number two, it would not be for the United Kingdom government to take an individual to court if that individual has not committed any offense in the United Kingdom itself. So from that point of view, I think as far as the British authorities are concerned, there is no need for a legal judgment. But of course, the individual concerned may well want to clear their name. And of course, Mr. Berisha said last year that he was going to take the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, to court, and some kind of legal procedure was started in France, in Paris. I don't believe much has happened in that case, and it probably would not be very wise for anybody to challenge a decision that the United States believes to have been based on facts.
What about this decision by United Kingdom? Can Salih Berisha challenge this in British courts, and could it be reversed?
Well, that's a very interesting point. I think that, first of all, I see no reason why he should not be able to challenge this decision, at least, or appeal against it. Having said that, the matter would may well be that a court in the United Kingdom, where he would probably need to do this, not outside the United Kingdom, might well say that it has no particular authority to deal with a matter that is a dispute between the United Kingdom executive and a private individual in another country who is not a citizen of this country and who is not involved in a particular matter other than a demonstrable offence in Britain. That has not an offence that has not taken place in Britain. So it's he can attempt to do so, and then, as I was saying, the court may well rule that it has no jurisdiction over such a matter, that this is a matter for the United Kingdom government, and I think that's the most likely case. Whether he could take it further, that's another matter. European Court of Human Rights. There are all sorts of other avenues in principle that he could attempt to appeal to, but I would have thought, in general, it probably is not a wise move, because my assumption is that governments would not be making such statements and issuing such designations unless they felt that they had a very well-founded case.
So what's left for Salih Berisha then, according to you? Just accept it and move on? Is that it?
I think Mr. Berisha is in a very difficult position. There's no doubt about that, particularly now that he can't just blame everything on the United States or alleged allegations that seem to be rather absurd relating to Mr. George Soros, the billionaire financier.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. He has accused the current Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, and also George Soros. So do you actually think that George Soros and the Open Society could have something to do with this, or they're not based in anything at all, those accusations from Salih Berisha?
I believe it's an absurd allegation, and more so in the British case than in the United States example, because whatever influence Mr. Soros may have in the US, particularly in democratic political circles, and I don't think that had any bearing on the decision of the US State Department last year, but whatever influence he may have there, he does not have it in the UK for the very simple reason that the current Conservative government is very much anti-immigrant, many ways anti-liberal, very much populist, even nationalist form of conservative government we have here, and many of its policies are directly in contradiction to the approach and the policy that Mr. Soros would like countries in Europe, and not just in the European Union, but outside it, to adopt. So for that reason, I don't think it has anything to do with him. Mr. Rama, well, who knows what information or intelligence Albania itself, all the Albanian authorities may have provided to both the US and the UK. That is a question I cannot answer. But in a sense, it leaves Mr. Rama in a very strong position, in as much as he doesn't need to do anything publicly. It would be difficult for him to order to the Albanian authorities to have a legal avenue, pursue prosecution of Mr. Berisha on the grounds that this might be seen as political revenge. And we've seen that governments in Albania and oppositions, however much they are opposed to each other, They've avoided doing that on a large scale. The only example I can think of is back in the 1990s relating to Fatos Nano, the former Socialist Party leader who was prosecuted and imprisoned under Mr. Berisha's presidency. So I think, in a sense, Mr. Rama is certainly definitely benefiting from this situation, and how much he may have contributed to it, I cannot tell. But I would have thought that American and British intelligence would have plenty of information that available to them to have persuaded the governments, if they needed persuading, to make the decisions in the way that they have done by, in effect, declaring Mr. Berisha persona non grata.
Well, in appearance, at least, it looks like an international campaign against Salih Berisha, and no doubt it has caused damages, not just for Berisha himself, but for the Democratic Party as well. And also given the fact that other politicians that are declared non grata by from United Kingdom are not named for legal reasons, obviously. Does this make the situation even worse for Berisha and for the Democratic Party? And how worse would it be the relations between the position between the government and the opposition, according to you?
Well, I think the first point I would make is that, of course, we do not know who is on that list. And it's quite feasible that there may be some politician from the Socialist Party, even possibly high-level politicians or former ministers. We don't know. That's number one. It was Mr. Berisha who volunteered the information about him being one of those on the list. And perhaps he did that to avoid it leaking out, and it might have been more embarrassing. He was trying to preempt that sort of situation. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's, and maybe we haven't even discussed this before, I think it's a very important point. Why have the two governments done this, taken this action? I think the reason for that is not because Mr. Berisha was or was not involved in significant corruption 10 years ago when he was Prime Minister. I think the main reason is that they see him as a disruptive force. What these governments want, Britain, the United States, what they want is stability in Albania and across the Western Balkans, particularly at a time of increased geopolitical tension with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Russian influence and possibly Chinese influence across the Balkans. So the last thing they want is disruption, instability, and that has always been associated with Mr. Berisha. His supporters even attacked the Democratic Party headquarters back in January, his own party, when he was claiming that it was the party was being run by those who had no right to do so. He's been against the Open Balkans initiative. He's been stridently pursuing anti-Serbian policies. Now, as I was suggesting, the last thing at the moment that the United States or Britain, as its probably strongest NATO ally, want to see is instability either within a country or across the region. And I think this is where they see Mr. Berisha as being a potential danger, not because he was involved in corruption, according to their allegations, 10 years ago. So finally, just to answer your point, I think it's this places never mind about his personal position, but the Democratic Party in a position where it cannot have credibility as an opposition party that is there to be in a position where it can take over government, that it has credible, plausible claim to be a government when it is led by an individual who is at odds with Albania's most powerful and its strongest and most influential supporter, United States. It is also at odds now with the British government, which is closely linked to the United States and remains a very strong, possibly the strongest military power among the European NATO allies. So it is putting the Democratic Party in an unenviable position, and where it will be all the objectives and long-term goals of Albania, of joining the European Union, of closer integration with NATO, would be seen to be potentially in doubt if the Democratic Party were to take over. Not least the fact that the Albanian population and society, generally speaking, also, apart from the Democratic Party stalwarts, and who of course are very loyal to Mr. Berisha, may have overlooked these facts and their importance for Albania's security and its place in Europe and in the world.
Well, okay. Lastly, what do you think about the current Albanian political situation, given all the facts that we're talking about, the fact that the opposition in Albania has diminished over the years? So it seems like the government has, let's say, extra powers due to that, due to weakness of the opposition parties in Albania. So what do you think about that situation? And secondly, what do you think about the progress made over the years by Albania on its European integration path?
Well, let's start with the second part of the question, which is, yes, Albania obviously has made considerable but very slow progress. There's no doubt about that. And of course, we've seen a very important milestone was passed this week when Albania finally began its direct and formal EU accession talks. And that's a huge achievement. And of course, it is the result of work that was accomplished both by the Democratic Party-led government, the coalition government led by the Democratic Party, and then subsequently by the Socialist Party, and of course the Socialist government of the last 10 years. All of that, 9 years, all of that is now being approved. And of course, we also know that Albania was ready to start the talks, but it's been held up over the last 18 months or so by the Bulgarian North Macedonian dispute. So there's no doubt that much has been achieved, albeit, and let's be frank, it's taken a long time, a very long time. Some of it partly Albania's own slow progress and its inability to deal more firmly with corruption and organized crime. Some of it to do with enlargement fatigue within the EU countries. So that's number one. The second one is that I think it's very harmful for Albanian politics that the main opposition party has, in effect, scored an own goal by tying its fortunes to that of Mr. Berisha. Regardless of his achievements in helping the transformation of Albania from communist rule to democratic rule in the early 1990s, regardless of all that, Mr. Berisha is obviously not the person that is viewed by Albania's most important allies as the individual to lead a potential government. And that, of course, is helping the ruling party, the Socialist Party, and in a sense, it's making life easier. It's, in a sense, perhaps putting less pressure on the government, domestic pressure from the opposition to deal with the issues of corruption, however important they still are. And again, I'm not trying to ignore the progress that has been made with the new judicial institutions, anti-corruption institutions, so on. But still, there are many problems, huge problems, yes. Everyone is aware of that. And in a sense, it is making life for the government much easier not to have what appears to be a credible opposition, an opposition that is still split anyway, and also which is now led by an individual who is not seen as a potential negotiating partner by Albania's most powerful allies.
Okay, Gabriel Partos, thank you very much for being part of the program this evening.
Thank you very much and faleminderit.
All the best. Shikues të nderuar, ishim këtu me ish gazetarin e BBC-s dhe analistin Gabriel Partos në këtë intervistë të shkurtër në programin UniversAL këtu në ALB UK TV. Unë ju falenderoj që na ndoqët dhe ju uroj natën e mirë dhe mirupafshim.
Shtëpia është aty, ku zemra rreh, aty ku më presin sy të gëzuar me padurim, çdo herë që kthehem në vendin tim. Largimi është gjithmonë i vështirë, ndaj sigurohem të jem aty në ditët më të rëndësishme për ta. Me EasyPay dhe Ria Money Transfer. Unë dërgoj para me tarifat më të lira kudo në Shqipëri.
Daja, po ti s'do vish për diklinjen time?
Nuk mund të vi dot sot, por të kam sjell një surprizë që do të pëlqej shumë.
Nuk ka gjë më të bukur se sa të gëzosh njerëzit e tu më të dashur. EasyPay dhe Ria Money Transfer dërgojnë para aty ku vërtet ka rëndësi.